Did you really think your father's badge would protect you today? It always has, until now. That badge isn't your shield, Mr. Marlowe.
Then why does everyone act like it is?
You threatened an officer. Explain that. I didn't threaten him. I reminded him who I am.
The courtroom buzzed with a strange, electric tension long before Judge Caprio even took his seat. People leaned forward in their chairs, whispering to one another, trying to catch a glimpse of the young man who had just stepped through the heavy wooden doors. He moved slowly not because he was nervous, but because he wanted the entire room to feel the weight of his arrival. This wasn't the walk of someone facing consequences. This was the entrance of someone who believed the rules existed for everyone except him. Ethan Marlowe, the 23-year-old son of Mayor Richard Marlowe, carried himself with a confidence that bordered on theatrical. His tailored coat, sleek sunglasses and expensive cologne felt wildly out of place in a municipal courtroom, yet he wore them like armor. Every step echoed with a deliberate arrogance, the kind that made even seasoned officers exchange uneasy glances. Ethan paused for a moment, tilting his head as though the courtroom itself was beneath him, then casually flashed a polished badge hanging from a chain in his hand. His father's badge. Several people in the gallery gasped. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. It was a message. A challenge. A declaration that he believed this entire process was little more than a formality, one he could bend with a single name. The air grew thick as he smirked and strutted toward the defendant's table, tapping the badge against his palm like a backstage pass. But what Ethan didn't realize was that this time, the script he had lived by his entire life was about to collapse. Judge Caprio had seen arrogance before, but never this bold, never this rehearsed, and certainly never waved so directly in front of justice itself. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe and comment on Real Judge Stories. Ethan settled into the defendant's chair as if it were a plush seat in a private lounge rather than a hard wooden bench meant for those awaiting judgment. He didn't sit the way ordinary people sit, upright, cautious, aware of the gravity of their situation. He reclined. One arm draped lazily over the back of the chair, the other hand adjusting his sunglasses with a slow, dismissive flick. Even the smallest gestures carried a silent message. I own this room. His jaw moved with a faint chew, gum cracking between bites, a tiny act of rebellion that felt louder than the murmurs rippling through the courtroom. No one could look away. His suit, stitched from fabric meant for red carpets rather than legal hearings, caught the overhead lights with every shift of his body. The gold bracelet on his wrist clinked just enough to irritate the officers nearby. It was all carefully crafted. Everything he wore and everything he did existed to project dominance. Across the aisle, Officer Reyes sat rigid and focused, still in uniform, hands clasped tightly together. He didn't react when Ethan shot him a smug grin, but the tension between them hung like a thick curtain. Ethan tapped his father's badge lightly against the desk, letting the metallic sound echo through the chamber. His expression sharpened into something cold, calculated, as if daring anyone to challenge him. He didn't acknowledge the judge's bench. He didn't glance at the clerk or the court officers. To Ethan they were background noise, pieces of a set built around him. His eyes wandered instead toward the gallery, scanning the faces like an actor searching for applause. In his mind this wasn't a trial. It was a performance, another reminder that he was the mayor's son and in his worldview consequences were for other people. Judge Frank Caprio finally entered the courtroom, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. Conversations died mid-whisper, chairs stopped creaking, and even the fluorescent lights seemed to soften out of respect for the man who had spent decades delivering justice with equal parts compassion and firmness. He walked with measured steps toward the bench, carrying a calm authority that didn't need volume or theatrics. It simply existed, the way sunrise fills a room without asking permission. As he settled into his seat, Caprio lifted his eyes toward the defendant's table, expecting the usual nervous posture he saw in most young people facing serious charges. But what he saw instead was Ethan Marlowe lounging like he was poolside at a luxury resort. Sunglasses still on. Arms slung over the chair. Father's badge resting casually beside his elbow as if it were a reserved seating sign. Caprio paused. Not dramatically. Not in anger. He simply paused long enough for the silence to carry its own message. His gaze rested on Ethan with steady, quiet weight, not threatening, not impatient, but unmistakably aware. He noticed everything. The gum chewing, the smirk, the badge placed deliberately in view of the entire courtroom. And in that brief moment, Caprio understood exactly the type of defendant sitting before him. A young man who had never truly been told no. Ethan's posture didn't shift when their eyes met. In fact, he leaned back a little further, almost daring the judge to react. But Caprio didn't respond with irritation. Instead, he drew in a slow breath, folded his hands neatly on the bench, and addressed the courtroom with his usual composed tone. This wasn't going to be another day where power overshadowed accountability. And Ethan Marlowe had no idea how unprepared he was for that reality. The clerk rose from her seat, smoothing out a sheet of paper with practiced precision. The courtroom's hush tightened as she cleared her throat, preparing to read the charges that had brought Ethan Marlowe, someone who believed himself untouchable, into this very room. Ethan didn't look at her. He didn't shift, blink, or straighten his posture. He kept chewing his gum, sunglasses still on, badge glinting beside him like a silent threat. Case number 24-918, the clerk announced, her voice steady. The State versus Ethan Marlowe. Several heads in the gallery tilted, waiting for the list. They knew some of it. But rumors and reality were two different things. You are charged with reckless driving at excessive speeds, she continued, eyes scanning the document, endangering pedestrians and property while traveling through a residential zone. Ethan smirked, not even pretending to listen. Judge Caprio noted the grin. Additionally, the clerk said, her tone tightening slightly, you are charged with obstructing a traffic stop, failing to comply with lawful orders, and attempting to intimidate a public officer during the incident. Officer Reyes kept his gaze forward, jaw clenched just enough to show restraint. But the final charge was the one that made several people lean closer. And lastly, she read, misuse of a government-issued identification symbol. Her eyes flicked briefly to the shining badge beside Ethan, for the purpose of influencing or interfering with law enforcement duties. A ripple of discomfort spread across the courtroom. Ethan finally looked up, lifting his sunglasses just enough to reveal a bored expression. His voice carried a lazy, dismissive chill. You're really making a big deal out of nothing. Judge Caprio didn't respond. He simply observed, letting the weight of the accusation settle around a young man who still believed he was immune to gravity. Ethan let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind meant to announce boredom to the entire world. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, tapping his father's badge against the wood with a soft metallic rhythm that grated on everyone's nerves. Then he looked directly at Judge Caprio, not with fear or even respect, but with the same smug confidence of someone who had been rescued from consequences his entire life. Your Honor, Ethan began, dragging out the title as if he were humoring a child, I think we all know this is just unnecessary. He gestured lazily toward the stack of papers outlining the charges. Reckless driving? Intimidation? Come on. Officer Reyes overreacted. He's new. He got nervous. Happens. The courtroom stiffened. Ethan continued, oblivious or perhaps proudly aware of the tension he was stirring. I mean look, he tapped the badge again, this time louder. My father runs half the departments involved here. This whole situation could have been cleared up in a 5-minute phone call. We didn't need all, he waved vaguely at the courtroom, this? Judge Caprio's expression didn't change. He watched quietly, hands folded, observing the careful performance of entitlement unfolding in front of him. Ethan leaned back again, stretching his arms like he owned the bench, the carpet, the oxygen. Honestly, I thought we'd skip the theatrics. My dad's badge speaks for itself. It always has. A few people in the gallery exchanged uneasy glances. Officer Reyes shifted slightly in his seat, but he didn't break his composed posture. I'm not here to waste your time, Ethan added with a shrug. So if you want to get this wrapped up, just make the call. My father will straighten it out. He smiled confidently, unaware that every word he spoke was tightening the noose he didn't even realize was around his own arrogance. Judge Caprio lifted his gaze slowly, the kind of movement that didn't demand silence, yet created it. The courtroom seemed to fold into itself as his calm eyes settled on Ethan Marlowe. For a moment, Caprio said nothing. He simply studied the young man who behaved as if justice were a game he'd already won. Finally, Caprio spoke, his voice even and measured. Mr. Marlowe, this is a court of law. We do not resolve criminal charges with phone calls to public officials. Ethan chuckled under his breath, a quiet, mocking sound. Judge, with all due respect. Caprio gently raised a hand. Respect, he repeated, tasting the word carefully. I'm not sure you understand what that means, Mr. Marlowe. Respect is something shown, not claimed. Ethan's smirk widened. Look, I get it. This is your job. You have to act stern. But let's be realistic here. He tapped the badge beside him. You know who my father is? Every officer in this building knows who my father is. And what exactly does that imply? Caprio asked, his tone still calm but carrying an unmistakable firmness beneath it. Ethan shrugged casually. It implies that this whole thing is blown out of proportion. Officer Reyes got a little jumpy. I simply reminded him of the bigger picture. There's no need to drag this out. A low murmur swept through the gallery. Caprio leaned forward slightly, hands folded atop the bench. Mr. Marlowe, are you suggesting that your father's position should influence how this court proceeds? Ethan hesitated, not long but enough for the room to feel the shift. I'm saying that context matters, he replied, regaining his arrogance. People in this city know who should and shouldn't be hassled. Caprio nodded slowly, though not in agreement, more like a man who had finally seen the full depth of the problem before him. Judge Caprio exhaled gently and nodded toward the clerk. Let's review the body cam footage from Officer Reyes, he said, his tone steady, deliberate. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen beside the bench flickered to life. A soft mechanical hum filled the silence, followed by the grainy glare of streetlights captured through the lens of a patrol camera. The footage opened on a quiet midnight road. Then, suddenly, a sleek black sports car tore across the frame, engine roaring like a challenge hurled into the darkness. The speedometer reading blinked across the corner of the screen, 72 miles per hour in a 35 zone. The gallery tensed. Ethan didn't. He simply leaned back and crossed his legs as if watching a movie he'd already spoiled for everyone. The video continued, the sports car weaving carelessly between empty lanes, skirting too close to parked vehicles, ignoring a stop sign without even the courtesy of slowing. A moment later, the police cruiser's lights activated, splashing red and blue across the pavement. Officer Reyes approached with calm professionalism. Sir, license and registration, please. Ethan's voice came through the speaker, dripping with sarcasm. Do you know who I am? The courtroom stiffened. Reyes repeated his request, steady and respectful. Ethan's laughter crackled through the speakers. Look at the name on the license. Marlowe. As in my father. As in the man who signs half the department's checks. A few people gasped. Ethan didn't blink. Then came the moment that changed the room. Ethan stepped closer to Reyes, lowering his voice but not his arrogance. You keep pushing this and I'll make sure you're directing traffic at school crossings for the rest of your career. Reyes didn't respond in the video. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. The footage paused, frozen on Ethan's smirking face. And the courtroom felt the full weight of what they had just witnessed. The courtroom remained frozen in silence as the final frame of the body cam footage hovered on the screen. Ethan Marlowe leaning in, sunglasses low, that unmistakable smirk carved across his face. Judge Caprio nodded for the video to continue, and with a soft click, the footage rolled forward. Officer Reyes stood firm in the recording, shoulders squared, voice calm. Sir, I need you to step back and cooperate. This is a routine traffic stop. But Ethan wasn't listening. He stepped closer, invading the officer's space with an entitled swagger. Routine? Nothing about me is routine, he said, words laced with contempt. You're new, right? That explains it. You don't know who you're dealing with. Reyes didn't flinch. Ethan hated that. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Ethan continued, tapping his father's badge against the officer's chest. Not hard, but intentionally enough to make a point. This means something. Maybe you missed that in training. The gallery shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippling like wind across water. Ethan leaned even closer in the footage, lowering his voice into a cold whisper. Tear up the ticket, Reyes. Trust me, you don't want to make an enemy out of me. One call and you'll be doing traffic duty on the slowest corner in the city. The threat hung like a thick cloud. Reyes still didn't respond. He simply finished writing the citation and held out the slip. Sign here. Ethan slapped the pen out of his hand. The courtroom gasped at the sight, an arrogant swipe caught clearly on the screen. Then Ethan spoke the words that drained the last bit of patience from everyone watching. You work for people like me. Don't forget that. The footage paused again. This time Ethan didn't lean back. Even he seemed to feel the undeniable shift in the room. Judge Caprio let the final frame linger on the screen before motioning for the projector to be turned off. The courtroom lights brightened slowly, revealing the stunned expressions of nearly everyone in the gallery. Ethan Marlowe sat rigid for the first time, the mask of confidence flickering ever so slightly. Caprio folded his hands calmly, his gaze steady and unwavering. Mr. Marlowe, he began, voice controlled yet unmistakably sharp, what we just witnessed is not merely a traffic violation. It is a display of arrogance, intimidation, and a profound misunderstanding of responsibility. Ethan shifted, but Caprio continued before he could speak. You were speeding through residential streets at dangerous levels. That alone places innocent people at risk. But far more troubling than your reckless driving is the manner in which you behaved when confronted by a public officer. Caprio's voice carried the weight of measured disappointment, not anger, not outrage, but the deeper ache of someone who has seen one abuse of power too many. You attempted to use your father's badge as a shield, Caprio said, nodding toward the table where the badge still glinted like a silent accomplice. You did not use it to protect the public. You used it to protect yourself from accountability. The room absorbed every syllable. You threatened Officer Reyes for doing his job. You insulted him. You tried to intimidate him. And when he stood firm, you escalated your behavior further, dismissing the law as though it were a suggestion for lesser people. Caprio leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing with purpose. Mr. Marlowe, public service is not a weapon. It is a privilege, a responsibility. And the way you misused your father's badge dishonors not just this court, but every honest officer who serves this community. Ethan swallowed hard, finally understanding that this was not unfolding the way he had imagined. A heavy stillness settled over the courtroom, the kind that felt almost physical, like a weight pressing down on every shoulder in the room. No one whispered now. No one shifted in their seat. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to quiet itself in respect for the moment. The gallery, moments earlier filled with murmurs and tiny gasps, sat frozen as if the air had been sucked out of the building. Every eye was on Ethan Marlowe. He wasn't slouched anymore. The playful grin had vanished. His fingers, once tapping his father's badge with cocky rhythm, now hovered uncertainly over the table. For the first time, his arrogance had cracked. Not shattered, not erased, but cracked enough for the room to sense it. Officer Reyes kept his posture composed, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just the quiet validation of a man who had stayed professional in the face of disrespect. Across the aisle, an older woman leaned into her husband and whispered, "He really thought that badge would save him." Her voice was barely a breath, yet somehow it echoed the sentiment shared by nearly everyone around her. Judge Caprio remained still, observing the room with the patience of someone who understood the value of silence. He allowed the tension to stretch, not for drama, but to let the truth settle, to ensure the gravity of Ethan's actions was felt by everyone present, including Ethan himself. A young man in the back clasped his hands together, unable to look away from the defendant who had walked in dripping privilege and now sat shrinking under the weight of accountability. Ethan swallowed, his throat tight, as if the room itself had turned into a mirror reflecting everything he didn't want to see. The silence said more than any verdict had yet spoken. Judge Caprio finally broke the silence with a slow inhale, his gaze fixed on Ethan Marlowe as though trying to look past the expensive suit and carefully crafted arrogance into the young man beneath it. He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward just slightly, enough to signal that the time for observation had ended. "Mr. Marlowe," Caprio said, his tone steady but edged with unmistakable intent, "you have just watched yourself threaten a police officer, misuse a badge that does not belong to you, and display a level of disrespect that is deeply troubling. Tell this court, how do you explain your behavior?" Ethan shifted in his seat. Everyone saw it. A small, involuntary twitch of discomfort. He cleared his throat, trying to recover the swagger he had walked in with. "Your Honor," he began, attempting a casual tone that landed awkwardly, "you have to understand, things move quickly out there." "I was frustrated. I was tired." Officer Reyes jumped into assumptions. "I was just trying to clarify my position." Caprio's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Clarify," he repeated. "By threatening his career?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean it like that. People exaggerate in the heat of the moment." Caprio's voice sharpened with precision. "You told the officer he would be directing school crossings if he didn't comply with your request. Is that an exaggeration, Mr. Marlowe, or is that intimidation?" A ripple of tension swept the room. Ethan looked away, fingers curling around the edge of the table. I was trying to de-escalate," he muttered, though even he didn't seem convinced. Caprio let the words hang for a long, heavy moment. "What you attempted was not de-escalation," he said quietly. "It was control." The truth struck harder than any raised voice ever could. And for the first time Ethan didn't have a rehearsed answer. Ethan Marlowe's confidence, once thick enough to fill the entire courtroom, now clung to him in thin scraps. He straightened his tie, though it didn't need straightening. He rubbed his palms against his thighs, though there was nothing on them. Small, nervous gestures, ones he had never made in public before, betrayed the cracks forming beneath his polished exterior. "Your Honor," he began again, voice softer than anyone expected. Maybe I didn't handle things the right way. The words came out shaped like an apology but hollow in substance, the way someone speaks when they're trying to protect themselves more than admit fault. Ethan forced a breath. Officer Reyes misunderstood me. I wasn't trying to intimidate him. I was just reminding him that people sometimes make mistakes pulling over the wrong person. He winced slightly at his own explanation, as though hearing it aloud revealed how flimsy it truly was. Caprio didn't react. He simply listened, his expression unreadable. Ethan glanced at the gallery, searching for even one sympathetic face. There were none. I admit, Ethan continued, shifting again, maybe flashing the badge wasn't the best move. But it wasn't a threat. It was context. He hated how his voice cracked on that last word. Context. Caprio repeated gently. Ethan nodded quickly. Yes, my father is the mayor. People recognize the name. Officers know who's who in the city. I thought it would, smooth things out. The judge's silence felt heavier than any rebuke. Ethan swallowed hard. I wasn't trying to abuse power. I just assumed, I guess I assumed things would work like they always have. And there it was, the first honest sentence Ethan had spoken. A quiet admission that his world, the one built on privilege and automatic leniency, had finally collided with reality. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, hands folded, eyes never leaving Ethan Marlowe. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet force that filled every corner of the courtroom. Not loud, not angry, but unmistakably firm, the kind of tone that made even the most confident person sit up straighter. Mr. Marlowe, Caprio began, what troubles me most is not your speeding, nor even your immediate reaction during the traffic stop. What troubles me is the mindset behind your actions. His gaze lowered briefly to the badge on the table, then rose again. You held that badge as if it were a shield. As if your father's position entitled you to protection from consequences. Ethan's breath hitched. Caprio continued, public office is not a throne. It is not inherited and it is not a family privilege. It is a duty, one that must be carried with humility, integrity, and respect for the very laws you attempted to bend. The gallery listened in complete silence. You threatened an officer who remained professional in the face of blatant intimidation, Caprio said, voice tightening. You attempted to weaponize authority. You acted as though the law existed to serve you, rather than to protect the public. He leaned forward. Let me be perfectly clear. The badge you misused was not yours. It represents trust. It represents sacrifice. Officers risk their lives wearing that symbol, not so their families, or their families' children, can exploit it for convenience. Ethan stared at the floor. Your actions reflect a dangerous belief, Caprio said. A belief that your last name elevates you above your fellow citizens. That is a mistake. A profound one. And if not confronted now, it will shape your future in ways far worse than a courtroom hearing. The judge's voice softened, but it only made his words strike deeper. Today, Mr. Marlowe, you learned that true respect is earned, not inherited. Judge Caprio took a slow breath, letting the silence settle once more before delivering the words everyone in the room had been waiting for. Ethan Marlowe lifted his eyes just enough to watch the judge, the last remnants of his confidence clinging to him like fading embers. Caprio's tone remained steady, never cruel, never triumphant, but filled with the firm clarity of a man who understood exactly what justice required. Mr. Marlowe, he began, the consequences of your actions must reflect the seriousness of the choices you made. You misused a badge that symbolizes public trust. You intimidated an officer performing his lawful duty. You endangered others with your reckless driving. And you attempted to leverage your father's position to escape consequences. Ethan swallowed hard. For these reasons, Caprio continued, I am imposing a fine of $5,000. This is not simply a monetary penalty, it is a reminder that reckless behavior comes at a cost. A ripple moved through the gallery. In addition, Caprio said, his voice firming, your driver's license will be suspended for 1 full year. You demonstrated a disregard for the rules of the road, and removing driving privileges is necessary for public safety. Ethan's shoulders sagged. But Caprio wasn't finished. You will also complete 200 hours of community service with the police department. Not in traffic enforcement, no. You will assist with administrative and community outreach responsibilities. You will witness firsthand the work done by men and women who do not hide behind authority, but earn respect through service. Ethan blinked rapidly, the weight of the sentence finally settling over him. And lastly, Caprio added, voice steady but purposeful, You will attend mandatory workshops on leadership, respect, and civic responsibility. At the end of these courses, you will submit a written reflection to this court. The verdict was clear. For the first time, Ethan Marlowe sat truly humbled. Ethan Marlowe didn't fully understand the weight of Judge Caprio's sentence until the following Saturday morning, when he stood outside the precinct holding a clipboard instead of a badge, dressed not in designer clothes but in a plain gray shirt that didn't hide him behind status or privilege. The officers walking past him didn't glare or smirk. They simply acknowledged him with brief nods, the same nods they offered every volunteer who stepped through those doors. Officer Reyes was there too, sorting through case files at a worn desk. He didn't look up immediately. When he finally did, his expression held no bitterness, no satisfaction, just measured professionalism. "You can start with these," he said, sliding a stack of folders toward Ethan. "Alphabetize, update the logs, then file them." Ethan nodded silently. The first few days were a shock to his system. Hours spent answering phone calls, organizing paperwork, and assisting with community outreach left him drained in ways he wasn't used to. There were no shortcuts here. No special treatment. No one cared who his father was or what his last name meant. Respect came only from effort, and Ethan wasn't used to working for it. But something unexpected happened. During a break, he overheard officers discussing safety initiatives, late-night patrols, and community events designed to keep kids off the streets. For the first time, he saw the badge not as a symbol of authority, but as a symbol of responsibility. Officer Reyes spoke to him occasionally, not as an enemy but as someone guiding a young man through unfamiliar ground. By the third week, Ethan found himself arriving early, volunteering for tasks others avoided. He listened more than he talked. He apologized when he made mistakes. And slowly, almost reluctantly, he began feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Respect. Earned, not inherited. By the time Ethan Marlowe reached the final phase of his community service, something in him had shifted, slowly, quietly, and almost without him noticing. So when the precinct organized a youth outreach session at a local high school, Ethan didn't resist the assignment the way he might have weeks earlier. He simply took a seat on the small auditorium stage, heart pounding in a way that felt unfamiliar. Dozens of teenagers stared back at him, arms crossed, brows raised, curiosity mixed with skepticism. They didn't see a mayor's son. They didn't see privilege. They saw someone standing in a place reserved for people who had made mistakes. Ethan exhaled shakily before speaking. "I'm not here because I'm perfect," he began slowly, his voice lacking the swagger it once carried. "Actually, I'm here because I thought I was." A few students exchanged glances. Ethan continued. "I grew up believing my last name meant I didn't have to follow the same rules as everyone else. I thought flashing a badge would get me out of trouble, and that consequences were for people who didn't have connections." He paused, the memories hitting harder now that he was saying them aloud. "But I was wrong. Completely wrong." His voice steadied. "I disrespected an officer who was doing his job. I put people in danger because I didn't want to be bothered by rules. And the truth is, nothing about that made me strong. It made me irresponsible." The room quieted. Ethan glanced at Officer Reyes, who stood beside the stage. "Working with these officers taught me what real service looks like. It's not power. It's sacrifice. It's commitment. And it's respect, something I had to learn the hard way." Several students nodded, their expressions softening. For the first time, Ethan wasn't speaking to impress anyone. He was speaking to prevent them from becoming who he used to be. When Ethan Marlowe walked back into Judge Caprio's courtroom for his final hearing, the transformation was impossible to miss. Gone was the tailored arrogance, the sunglasses, and the swaggering steps that once tried to dominate the room. He moved with quiet purpose now, shoulders squared not with entitlement but with responsibility. He took his seat without theatrics, hands folded, eyes focused, not on the gallery, not on the officers, but on the judge who had become the turning point in his life. Officer Reyes was there as well, standing respectfully near the aisle. His expression remained neutral, but there was a subtle acknowledgement, a nod that suggested recognition of sincere effort rather than forced apology. Judge Caprio reviewed a small stack of papers before him, taking his time, making sure every detail was accounted for. The silence that filled the room wasn't tense this time. It was expectant, steady, reflective. Finally, Caprio looked up. "Mr. Marlowe," he began, "over the past several weeks, this court has monitored your progress closely." He tapped a finger gently against the documents. "You completed your community service without complaint. You fulfilled every task assigned to you. And your instructors report that you participated in the required workshops with honesty and genuine reflection. Ethan nodded once but didn't speak. Caprio continued, "This hearing is not about reward. It is about evaluating whether you understand the gravity of your actions." He paused just long enough for the words to land. "And based on your conduct, your growth, and your willingness to confront the mindset that brought you here, I can say this. You have taken real steps forward." A soft stir moved through the gallery. Caprio's gaze softened but remained firm. "Mr. Marlowe, accountability isn't meant to break you. It's meant to build you. Today you stand not as the mayor's son, but as a young man who chose to learn." For the first time, Ethan allowed himself a small, grateful breath. As the hearing concluded, Ethan Marlowe stepped out of the courtroom not with the swagger he once carried, but with the quiet steadiness of someone who had finally begun to understand himself. The doors closed behind him, the echo gentle, almost symbolic, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another he had never expected to face. Outside, the late afternoon light spilled across the courthouse steps, warm and unfiltered. Ethan paused there, hands in his pockets, letting the moment settle. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel defined by his father's name or the badge he had once used as a shortcut to respect. For the first time he felt defined by choice, his own. He thought of the officers he had worked beside. The endless paperwork he once mocked. The community events he had helped organize. The teenagers who listened, wide-eyed, as he admitted the truth of his arrogance. These weren't tasks meant to punish him. They were lessons wrapped in responsibility, lessons he had needed far more than he realized. Inside the courtroom, Judge Caprio gathered his files, unaware of the depth of the impact he had made. Yet his message lingered in Ethan's mind: respect is earned. Authority is responsibility. And the law is bigger than any name. Ethan took a slow breath, the weight of his old habits falling away piece by piece. He wasn't perfect, not even close, but he had finally learned that true strength wasn't found in intimidation or privilege. It was found in accountability, humility, and the willingness to grow even when the truth feels uncomfortable. As he walked down the courthouse steps, Ethan didn't feel like the mayor's son anymore. He felt like someone beginning, at last, to understand what integrity really meant.